Hello YouTube. People know this completely ordinary atmospheric phenomenon, right? Fog. According to scientific sources, the cause of the fog is the smallest condensation products of water vapor. As the researchers say, the fog is very dangerous for agriculture and transportation. For example, fog significantly impedes transportation communication, reducing horizontal visibility. The appearance of fog of particular concern to air traffic controllers, employees of sea and river ports, pilots, car drivers, and ship captains. There are statistics that over the past 50 years, 7,000 people have died due to fogs. Perhaps the largest car accident in Russia, which occurred due to fog, is considered to be a traffic accident that occurred near Krasnodar in the year 2006. 62 cars collided at that place at the same time. One person was killed and 42 participants of the accident were hospitalized. In other countries, as a result of heavy fog, for example, in 2006 too, more than 100 cars collided near Istanbul. 35 people were seriously injured. In the winter of 1957, fog caused a train accident in East London, in which about 87 people died. As it has now become known, the famous London fogs were formed as a result of the release of soot and dust from chimneys into the atmosphere of the city. Well, nowadays, thanks to the decisions taken by local authorities, London is no longer considered to be a fog city. Even with a weak fog, when visibility is no more than 1 kilometer, and even more so with a strong one, visibility is just like several dozens of meters. Ships experience great difficulty in moving through the waters of the seas and oceans. They anchor temporarily, they turn on sirens, but despite the precautions, the ships stumble into icebergs and rocks in the fog. The most famous tragedy at sea during fog is the destruction of the Titanic when it collided with an iceberg and sank after a little more than 2.5 hours. Interestingly, the fog interferes with the normal development of crops. With fog, humidity reaches 100%, so an environment is created that is conducive to the reproduction of plant pests, the appearance of fungal diseases, and increase in bacteria and so on. Fog causes huge damage when harvesting grain. Straw and grain become wet, poorly ground, which leads to significant crop losses. Harvesting potatoes in fog requires additional drying of tubers. In winter, fogs are terrible because they destroy the snow cover. After them, there is always a cold snap, and the ground is covered with an ice crust. After the Second World War, many countries began research and development on methods of dispersing fogs and clouds. To date, a well-known method is the dispersion of droplet liquid mists and clouds using dry ice and silver iodine. There are also new developments that help to influence fog even at positive temperatures. The leading Russian scientific centers engaged in research in the field of cloud and fog dispersions have achieved effective and environmentally safe results on artificial fog dispersion. So one of the ideas of scientists is the installation of mobile thermokinetic generators of heated air where visibility improvement is required. For example, near the runways of airfields, under roadsides, etc. These devices create an illumination zone with a length of 200 meters, with a width of 20 meters. For example, today Russian nitrogen generator systems are installed on the Trieste-Venice motorway. Despite the apparent simplicity in understanding the processes of formation and dispersion of fog, it turned out that the secret of fog is not still fully solved. And now, if we leave the basic reality behind, let's look at some other aspects of the fog. Well, the ufologists have long drawn attention to the existence of anomalous fogs and fog-like objects similar to UFOs. They tend to occur near the surface of water or earth or high in the atmosphere. There have been cases when these foggy UFOs staged a real hunt for airplanes, ships, automobiles, and people. So even at the dawn of aviation, there were reports of aircraft encounters with strange clouds in the sky. When they hit such nebulae, aircraft instruments failed, pilots lost their orientation in space, and even worse, aircraft either crashed or disappeared without a trace. Ships also encountered abnormal fogs. So, for example, in 1966, an entrepreneur was towing a barge to Florida from Puerto Rico. Halfway along the way, people saw a strange fog that suddenly thickened around the barge, gradually getting closer to the tugboat. The strangest was that the sky was clear, the sun was shining brightly. The devices went out of order, instruments. People were terrified. The captain ordered to cut the tow rope. When the tug moved away from the barge, the instruments started working again. The fog cloud dispersed, but there was no barge nearby. Well, the ufologists believe that fog-like objects are used by representatives of higher extraterrestrial races to abduct people. It has been noticed that abnormal fogs can move very quickly at sea and in the air. Having absorbed people, they quickly leave with their prey. On land, clouds choose secluded places for ambush, waiting for the next victim. For example, in Kenya, there is the island of Tenet, famous for its fogs. Natives and researchers have disappeared there a number of times. By the way, the name of the island means no return. And also, I told you before about a Central Asian island, also called Island of No Return, Barsa Kalmes. Very unusual place. There's a video that you can find in my channel. And the fog was also involved with the disappearances on that island, or appearances of strange creatures. Ufologists often tell about the case that happened in 1915 in Turkey, and I'm sure you have heard about it. Then during the war, a battalion of English soldiers disappeared. Many witnesses saw a detachment of 266 people enter the foggy haze. The misty cloud, having absorbed people, suddenly broke away from the ground, acquiring an ellipsoid shape on the move, and it rushed upwards. No traces of the battalion remained. A similar case occurred in 1937. 3,000 Chinese defended the city of Nanjing from the Japanese. At night, a thick fog descended on the trenches of the Chinese soldiers. The next morning, the positions were empty, void of people. All search of the soldiers were in vain. Of course, those facts that cannot be explained cause a lot of speculation and assumptions. Unfortunately, so far no one has been able to explain the phenomenon of devouring mists. In any case, the fact that scientists are seriously studying this atmospheric phenomenon gives hope that someday humanity will learn the truth about mysterious fogs. Let's look at the Russian mysterious fog phenomenon and some of the cases. Even in ancient times, people believed that fog was the doorway to other worlds. This is confirmed by ancient legends. According to the myths, for example, of the Ingush people, the entrance to the afterlife is filled with a thick black haze, in which a yashap, a winged serpent lurking, guarding the souls of the dead. Mysterious fogs have happened in Russia at different times. The old believers, or the Russian Christian religious dissidents from the 18th century on, called them the blue The fogs appeared instantly and just as accurately disappeared. They had a variety of colors, from white to intensely yellow. Inside, they were quite unpleasant, cold and slimy. All sounds drowned in them, no matter how loudly people yelled or screamed. Many dozens of people disappeared in the most mysterious way in the thick fogs in the vast territories from Kanin to the foothills of the Urals. The first historical records of the blue are found in the archives for the 16th, 17th centuries, when the territory of the tundra was intensely developed by Russian pioneers or conquistadores. You take your pick. Russian documentarian Alexander Rukhlov also mentions in his essays about the mysterious fog and the Novgorod Stroganov merchant family. 3 centuries ago, they organized a colony settlement for collecting furs of sea animals on the Novaya Zemlya. Prosperity ended quite quickly. The settlers began to disappear or die. An official of the Arkhangelsk, Governor Koningstand, after a conversation with indigenous people, pointed out the deadly, ominous yellowish fog as the root cause of their death. And we'll get to them a little bit later. Ancient legends of the indigenous northern people of Russia say that a destructive, mysterious fog is formed on earth for a reason, namely when the commandments of the ancestors are violated. Such a fog is formed from the souls of the dead. The restless souls of the dead who did not find peace on the polar or lodestar form the Tas blue fog on earth. Eyewitnesses describe it this way: the fog then swirls over a large area, then settles into a dense mass that completely absorbs the sun's rays and all sounds. It drives people crazy, takes them to itself, or leads to death, shrouds them forever. The only untouchables were the locals. But the Stroganov settlers were less fortunate. They disappeared or died. Everyone considered it a punishment for violating the ancient taboo. And they considered the punishment righteous because the Stroganov's people were looking for the green incorruptible in the rivers, as they called it. It refers to the shrines of these places. It is a special kind of pearl, white, light blue, reddish, and black, unfading and eternal. Then the pearls were widely used. They decorated a lot of things, from household utensils and clothes to icons and ceremonial outfits. There are stories and cases when people themselves provoke the fog, forcing it to punish a person for rash actions. So 3 centuries ago, a rich merchant named Stroganov from the Veliki Novgorod, the city I told you a few times about and will continue telling you, well, they organized a colony on the islands of Novaya Zemlya for the extraction of sea or marine animals. But less than a year later, all Stroganov's employees disappeared miraculously, if we can use this term. To investigate this incident, the industrialist himself embarked to the north, but the results of his investigation were disappointing. Local residents told the Russians that their comrades were swallowed up by yellowish mists, the blue woven from the souls of the dead, not accepted by the polar star. Judging by the stories of the Aborigines, so the Russians were punished for looking for the cherished incorruptible in the rivers. Green pearl, shining with a bright color. Pay attention to the color green. This pearl was once sent to Earth by the lodestar, and it chooses its own owner, and the one who breaks the taboo and tries to take possession or against his will goes to the land of the dead and stays there forever. whatever it was, but neither alive nor dead. The first Stroganov colonists were never found, and the mysterious blue still appears from time to time on the lands of the Russian north, hunting for the souls of people who do not respect the customs of their ancestors. In the Samoyed or Saami legends, it is known as Semsuga, which presumably means pearl. Unusual characteristics of polar pearls are obtained only in extreme northern rivers. The mysterious power of the pearl is obtained from the lodestar. The shamans believe that it is impossible to get such pearls just like that. They choose their own owners. They bring good luck, but they also can bring misfortune. There are countless fascinating stories about the mysterious fog, and the events taking place under its cover have not yet received scientific explanation. So let's look at some more stories. On one of the outskirts of the city of Moscow, there is a so-called Golos ravine. A historical document dating back to 1621 was found in the Russian capital archives. It is said that one day a mysterious fog of an unusual greenish color suddenly formed near the Tsar's gate, from which a small Tatar detachment on stunted horses, armed with outdated sabers, it appeared suddenly, that detachment. The warriors were dressed in shabby clothes. After an insignificant battle, the Tatars were captured and immediately very diligently interrogated. It turned out that this was the reconnaissance detachment of the Khan Devlet Girai. But after all, he has left the Muscovite lands more than 50 years ago. So how could this be? Historians also later found references to mysterious disappearances in the area of the Golos or Voice ravine. So in the archive of the police department of the Moscow province, there are records about peasants Ivan Bachkarev and Arkhip Kuzmin. They were considered missing in 1810 and found only 21 years later. They described their adventures in this way. Returning home from work from another village, they decided to shorten the road by passing through a ravine, although the elders warned against walking there, saying that this place is notorious for a number of things. A greenish fog formed at the bottom, in which a brightly lit passage suddenly appeared, along which they traveled. At the end of the way, they saw a group of strange creatures similar to humans, but completely covered with fur. The hairy people explained, using sign language, that the Ivan and Arkhip had fallen into another world from which it was difficult to return, but they would help them. The mysterious fog thickened again, and they moved on. When the peasants came to their native village, they were surprised to see wives older than themselves, and also adult offspring. 20 years had passed during their wanderings. Modern researchers, having studied that strange ravine and recorded the radiation there, assume that there is a fault at the bottom of the ravine to which strong radiation breaks through. Probably all the mysterious events taking place in this ravine relate to this radiation breaks. But of course there is more. According to the data provided by the candidate of technical sciences, the late Vadim Chernobrov, scientist, author, researcher, and explorer of his country's tremendous paranormal phenomenon. In the Soviet Union, a similar experiment as the one with Eldridge in the United States, and I don't need to explain anymore to those who understand. Well, a similar experiment was repeated on one of the Soviet cruisers of the Northern Fleet under the leadership of Igor Kurchatov. Years ago, I corresponded with Vadim Chernobrov, trying to help him with his time experiments by informing people in the West and trying to make some connections for him with Western scientists. Vadim's experiments with time reveal that the human eye perceives areas of space with different times. For example, where the time flows of our and the parallel worlds intersect, and the way it perceives them as a wall of white fog or as a luminous or radiant haze of various shades. Such areas of space can have a harmful effect on the body due to the difference in the velocity of time in different parts of the body. Only so-called initiates and magicians who have mastered special techniques can be in such points of space without harmful consequences for their health. Here's a recollection of a former Soviet officer about unusual experiences with strange fog. He got to see this greenish fog himself, which passed along the border of the forest and the field near the village Ramashki of the Priozersky district of the Leningrad region. This happened in 1990 at night when their unit was returning to back from after night shooting exercises at the tank field facility. They, who were still young officers at the time, were only interested in this phenomenon since they had never seen anything like this before. Fortunately for the young Soviet officers, they didn't have time to explore it. At that time, they did not know the nature of this phenomenon, but after entering such a fog, you can no longer return either to your time or to your world at all. That's how some people reported it. It should be added that there was no repetition of this phenomenon the next night. Apparently, these gates operate strictly at a certain time. Other incomprehensible phenomena also testify to the presence of abnormal energy in these places. For example, bright white flashes at an altitude of 5 to 20 meters above the ground, which they also observed repeatedly. And one day, the officers noticed a bright fireball hovering over the landfill, which obviously caused concern at the nearby Gromovo air base, because a pair of jet fighters flew to the object, which dispersed to the sides, bypassing the sphere from both sides. Now, it is difficult to say whether all these phenomena were a side effect of the impact of UFOs, or conversely, the activity of UFOs in this area was associated with the abnormal energy of this area. The answer to such questions can be found only after serious research. As for the appearance of the anomalous fog considered earlier, it is generally characteristic of space-time phenomena and is formed in places of transition from our world to other times and spaces. Fog, as a rule, can be of various shades, for example, greenish, purple, or blue. Scientists who have studied such a phenomenon as blue fog noted in the area of its location the intensity of the electric field exceeding the thunderstorm. For example, some researchers, as Gook for example, noted that during the appearance of the blue fog, car engines stall and the image of the terrain seems to blur. A strong electric charge was also noted by researcher Polonsky, who encountered this phenomenon in 1998 on the Chilean-Paraguayan border. By the way, many years ago, I was on the Brazil-Paraguay border and in Paraguay too, and I heard a few interesting stories about local fog. Anyway, the person I often mention in my videos about Russian paranormal phenomena, the scientist, mathematician Valentin Psalomshikov, who studied this phenomenon in the Urals, claims that the electric field intensity in the area of fog formation exceeded a thunderstorm, and a thin metal wire in silk insulation thrown into the fog zone instantly burned. Similar phenomena are not uncommon in the Andean mountains, Himalayas, and the Caucasus, and other mountain systems, and scientists associate them with high-altitude electricity. Such a strong electromagnetic field, natural or artificial, is capable of distorting space-time continuum, of forming a hole or entrance into another reality or another time in it. Getting into such a fog, a person disappears from our space-time and does not always have the opportunity to go back. So many coming out of the strip or the wall of such a fog noted that much more time had passed in our world than their own clocks showed, and others inexplicably moved to, by long distances away from the original spot. Russian researcher Odintsov notes that the fog as a rule occurs unexpectedly, and unlike ordinary fog, it is completely opaque and more dense. It can occupy large spaces and has a clear border without a gradual transition. Radars are not able to detect objects falling inside the zone of such a fog. People who have fallen into the fog claim that it is very difficult to leave its borders because it is a kind of viscous and oppressive environment. In general, as many researchers note, anomalous zones often have a completely standard set of natural conditions, among which it should be noted changes in the electrical conductivity of the air, the appearance of special clouds, or the formation of fog, which may have different shades, the appearance of various lights in the sky or around objects, the appearance of various unidentified flying objects. Other legends tell how creatures from the fog or the fog itself carry people away with them. Often reports of such encounters with fog, or as witnesses often call it, what they encountered, clouds, are given by ufologists. However, ufologists immediately associate such encounters with aliens, as I said before. See, because they already see so-called tricks of aliens and everything. But if we read their testimony with an open mind of the people who went into the fog, we will find a lot in common with the testimonies of people who have been near fogs and clouds or even passed through them. Here's a typical case, by the way, described by ufologist Kashmov. He happened to encounter with such a cloud in early September of 1989. Kashmov probably would have been abducted too, but something prevented them from doing so. It was a warm and almost cloudless day. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, having removed the last potatoes from the garden, Kashmov wanted to go to the forest for mushrooms. We love to collect mushrooms in Ukraine and Russia and Eastern Europe. Anyway, the forest was quiet, the sun was shining brightly. In some places, the foliage was already turning yellow and red on the trees, and the approach of real autumn was felt in the environment. After walking through the forest for about an hour, Kashmov noticed that there were a lot of crumbled nuts in the grass. Shaking the hazel bush lightly, he found that nuts were falling from the tree to the ground with a characteristic knock on the trunks, so to say. So Kashmov enthusiastically began to collect those nuts. Somewhere at 4:30, he felt someone's piercing gaze on him from his right side. At that moment, Kashmov was absolutely not thinking about anything. He raised his head and slowly got up. An unexpected panic seized him, and Kashmov felt the hair on his head begin to move. Looked around. There was no one. Mentally, he tried to calm himself. There is no one to be afraid of, and there is nothing. But it was useless. The feeling of a close and penetrating gaze did not leave him. Kashmov intuitively picked up the stick lying next to him, and looked around again. The fear increased even more. Kashmov raised his head. Between two large trees a dozen meters away and 2-3 meters from the ground, he observed something dark gray, and as it seemed to him at first, absolutely shapeless. It was a cloud about 2 by 4 meters in size. In length, it is located strictly vertically. There was a noise that sounded very much like the flapping of the wings of a huge flock of large birds. At the same time, there was a crackling of dry branches, as if someone was breaking trees, was destroying trees. Kashmov looked at a wild apple tree and wondered why broken branches did not fall from it. The cloud slowly rose above the tree and hovered in one place for a few seconds. At that moment, Kashmov began to feel so insignificant, helpless, and defenseless that there could be no question of any resistance to something or someone. It was as if his will and right to dispose of himself were completely taken away from him. In order not to fall, Kashmov knelt down. The thought flashed through his head that a short life had already been lived, and he was preparing for the worst. Something inexplicable began to swell the body from the inside, but there was no pain. Kashmov understood that the cloud hovering over the tree was the cause of everything, and in a moment of truly animal fear, he asked for help from God and mercy from the stationary object. Kashmov didn't think about escaping, and even at such a moment the object piqued his curiosity. He felt a weak electric current flowing through his body, and the cloud gave the impression of a living and thinking being. There was a feeling that this cloud was about to come towards Kashmov. It's too early for him to go there, the narrator thought. The object let out a whistle similar to the flight of an automatic bullet, and abruptly taking off, immediately disappeared in the southwesterly direction. The fear disappeared suddenly, as it had appeared. Kashmov examined the place where the object hovered, but didn't see anything significant, except for the grass crushed to the ground. After the incident, Kashmov walked through the forest until dark, and never thought about the cloud. Later, for almost 3 years, this cloud sometimes covered him before going to bed. It is possible to describe it in this way. In complete darkness, a huge blanket covered him with a color blacker than darkness. It appeared suddenly and disappeared just as quickly. Kashmov fell asleep at the same time, mostly without dreams. By the summer of 1992, these visions had completely stopped. A similar fog has been observed more than once in the western Indian Ocean, in the place known as the West Pocket of Death, and in that place, as well as in the Bermuda Triangle, a large number of missing ships and aircraft. Simultaneously with the appearance of thick fog, which feels literally like dense physical mass, lightning formations are also noticed there by eyewitnesses. Literally, the entire foggy array is stitched with fiery flashes. Here's what the Russian researchers Rechkin wrote about the anomalous fog. I must say that in the area of faults, not only the glow of plasma flowing from the bowels of the planet is possible, but the outputs of powerful plasmoids, which are often mistaken for UFOs. And also here is the opening of a space-time channel into which it may well fall for possible for human beings and animals. In the evenings, there is a greenish or purple fog in such places. These channels are a kind of gateway to parallel worlds. Here's how an eyewitness from Russia, Shapina, described such a hole in space-time continuum while staying with her husband in one of the anomalous zones. Night, light fog. They're walking down the road. Ahead are the lights of the Krasnoslobodsk. Closer, a little to the left, the lights of the farm. On the right, the lights of the learning facility farm center. Suddenly the fog begins to thicken sharply. All sounds, all external landmarks disappear. She stands with her husband as if enveloped in milk. Slowly moves forward. Suddenly a small area of several meters surrounded by fog opens up. Completely different smells come out. For some reason it smells like potato foliage, and the noise of the engines of rare cars is heard as if there is a highway nearby. In their area the smells are different. It smells of grass, river, and closer to the forest of pine. A ravine is visible on the left. It is not in the anomaly zone. While she was scared, clung to Volodya, her husband, and did not understand anything. And when they went further, the fog retreated a few meters in front of them and thickened behind them. They turned back, entered the fog again, and came out at the point from which they started their movement. Look, I think it's still you and I better stay out of the fog that looks mysterious or somewhat incomprehensible. Of course, a walk in a light morning haze seems attractive to many, but who knows where and when it may end. So I'll bring you more stories about the space-time continuum, mysterious fogs and clouds, and such similar phenomena. And if you can support my research, please do so through the links in the description to this video. And I thank you for your attention. Please subscribe to my channel and tell others.